So, Alan, we're talking today about the study that Siri did around battery storage or storage and power grids. And we're going to be talking specifically in this video about intermittency and how storage can affect or improve the problems that come with wind and solar around intermittent generation. What did your study find on that issue?
Well, we found that if you're using electricity storage, pumped hydro or compressed air or batteries, there isn't a cost-effective solution that includes storage when you're trying to firm up wind and solar. The more cost-effective solution at this point still remains the generation of power using natural gas. And that's mostly because the natural gas technologies are well developed. There's a significant supply chain, and the commodity cost is very low. Now, that's not to say that electricity storage options might be more cost effective in the future. They're just not cost effective right now.
Now, we did an interesting interview with an EV analyst a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying that lithium-ion batteries for EVs are now down around $120 a kilowatt hour. And the rumor is that VW has actually breached the $100 a kilowatt hour. And the expectation is that cost will continue to decline. If it gets below $100 a kilowatt hour, how does that affect the economics?
Well, any cost reduction is going to make those economics better, but it's not just the battery technologies themselves and those costs. There's a whole plethora of associated costs, and being able to put those storage sites in the right location in a grid. So those costs are important and one of the key factors, but it's not the only thing that would dictate whether or not those are cost effective. Because if we're looking at it in terms of a benchmark of what is the cheapest option, then you would consider using natural gas generation to back up that intermittency.
We interviewed Bertha de Bray, who is in charge of the Netherlands initiative to integrate EV batteries into the grid. And the idea being, of course, that you don't now have to buy the batteries, you're essentially using your customers' batteries. Did your study consider that at all?
No, we didn't. It is one thing that we want to evaluate going forward. But again, it goes to if you're looking at when is the typical time to charge your vehicles, it's at night. And that is the time when the power demand is probably at its lowest. So when the vehicles are being used during the day is when the power demand is needed, and they're not connected to the grid. So there's a lot of behavioral issues associated with how much you can rely on electric vehicle batteries in terms of the grid. So there's still a lot of uncertainty and a lot of questions related to what extent you can use people's batteries as a backup to the grid system.
It sounds like, from my reading and the interviews I've done in this area, that we're still, these are early days for the technology, early days for integration issues and engineering solutions to those. Is that your sense of it as well?
Yes, and in fact, what you'll see is we are working with the International Energi Agency on a study related to electricity technologies and the electricity grid. And the standard use for cost effectiveness has been the term we use, which is a levelized cost of electricity. Now, that is being expanded to trying to take into account the impacts associated with intermittent generation on the grid. And so a new term is being developed, which is called the system levelized cost of electricity. And that system levelized cost goes to recognizing what are the cost implications to the system of a particular technology going onto that system. And the difference between that term and the levelized cost of electricity is that the traditional term did not reflect how the new technologies would impact the running of the system. And so we'll get a much better understanding going forward about those two pieces together.
A couple of years ago, I interviewed Rudy Garza, who's a vice president with CSP, which is the San Antonio, Texas-owned utility. And I asked Rudy what his engineers thought of wind and solar, and he said it's great. We love it because there are no fuel costs. Just all you have is your capital costs, and it makes it, the engineers like that. Going forward, is that a major advantage, do you think, for the wind and solar plus battery combination? Are we expecting, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I would say yes, because one thing that you do have to take on when you have more traditional or fossil fuel or thermal-based generation is the fuel cost risk. When you have wind and solar and batteries, there's no fuel cost associated with that. So you know in advance what the long-term cost is going to be, assuming you've got a really good understanding of what your operating and maintenance costs are. And, you know, we are still learning on that aspect of it about, you know, whether the operation and maintenance costs and the lifetime of those technologies, the wind and solar, are as technically provided. And we know that there's always a difference between what is provided by the technical people and what actually happens in practice.
Allan, one final question for you. My take on the technology around renewable energy and battery storage, electric vehicles, is that the 2020s is going to be a really wild ride. I think we're going to see a lot of not only innovative disruption, but some of the technologies that have been languishing at the bottom of that adoption S-curve are going to begin to, the adoption is going to accelerate. What's your take on that view?
Well, yes and no. And the reason why I say yes and no is it depends on the electricity system. We have to keep in mind that, you know, if across this country, we are 13 independent systems. So all the territories, and in fact, some of the territories don't even have one consistent system. So it really depends on how it fits in with the growth of a particular jurisdiction, the existing technologies of that system, and the demands for that system in terms of not just the general growth, but whether it is a base load or a peaking load. So yes, it's definitely opportunities for wind and solar to be integrated into these systems, but it also depends on where they're going to be located, what level of resource can be depended upon, because that, you know, wind doesn't blow the same across the country, the sun doesn't shine the same across the country, and that has a big impact on the cost effectiveness of those technologies in different locations.
Allan, thank you very much for this. We'll look forward to chatting with you in the second part of this interview.
Thank you.